Next panel, we have, if you'll join me, Ted Glotfelty, Jessica Johnson, Lauren Footman, Kim Williams, and Shanna Devine.
Thank you.
I should start by saying that we are former IGs, in case that matters to anyone. So my name is Ted Glotfelty. I was the head of investigations at two different small federal agency offices of inspectors general. Most recently at the U.S. Ability One Commission, which is a very small federal agency that no one's ever heard of, but they handle $4 billion a year in federal contracts to nonprofits throughout the United States. And these nonprofits employ about 50,000 Americans who are blind and severely disabled. So it's a great program, it's a great agency. And the OIG, when I was hired, was the then newest federal office of Inspector General. Congress stood it up at the end of 2015. And I was hired to not just run, but to build that Office of Investigations. So as you may know, when you're in an Office of Inspector General, part of your role is to handle whistleblower complaints. So that was part of my portfolio. And it was a very interesting transition for me to go from handling whistleblower complaints from members of the public and other federal employees to becoming a whistleblower myself. So that's the little story I'm going to tell here. I'm going to try to do it in a slightly funny way, but at the time it was not funny at all. I was completely miserable. I developed depression and anxiety and a lot of other bad things that many of you who have gone through this can understand. So the scenario is that, this is just one example of many. I walk into my boss's office. This is the Inspector General himself, and he says, we have a scenario, we have a situation. It's very important. I need your advice on what to do. We have to open an investigation right away. I say, tell me more. And he says, well, there's this senior federal employee who has written a letter, and so it's in writing, and I want to be clear, it's in writing, and it's gone to another federal agency, so it's an interagency matter. It's really important. I'm like, okay, well, sir, what's in writing? And he explains that this letter contains a statement that an employee had retired, and in fact, the employee had resigned. And I'm like, surely there's more than this. And no, there wasn't. My boss didn't like a particular federal employee, wanted to start a federal investigation on the basis of retire versus resign. And so our last speaker, Ms. McNeil, talks about investigations being objective, or they're supposed to be, right? Well, here's an example of them being overtly not objective, right? The guy didn't like an employee and decided to target her with a federal investigation on an absurd pretense, right? And anyone with an ounce of integrity or an ounce of common sense knows that you don't open a federal investigation into someone using retire versus resign. It's absurd on its face, and yet I was ordered to do this. And so in that context, and in several others, unfortunately, I said, no, I'm sorry, I cannot do that. I cannot proceed with that order. And surprise, surprise, the guy who's targeting other people that he doesn't like being told, no, you can't target those people. And so he started targeting me. Before long, I received a reduction in force, and this was a couple of years ago now, so it was before it became cool. I was the trendsetter. I was reduced out of government, and this is a particularly unusual RIF because I was the head of investigations, right? Like you can't, the idea of a RIF is that you no longer need the position, right? And you can't not need the head of investigations, but I was RIFed anyway. And my story has a slightly happier ending. When you're within an OIG, one of the interesting bits there is that if you're a member of the public, or if you are a federal employee and you have a complaint, you have a whistleblower issue, you go to the Office of Inspector General. If you're in the Office of Inspector General, I mean, I can't file a complaint with myself. I would do a great job, but that's not probably going to be objective. So you can go to the president, who has other things on his mind. You can go to Congress, often also busy, or you can go to what's called the Integrity Committee. The Integrity Committee is made up of inspectors general from some of the larger federal agencies, and in theory, they're an objective form of oversight over the individual inspectors general. So I went to the Integrity Committee. They thought that my complaint had merit. They opened an investigation. They told me it would be done in 6 months. They're assigning their A team. 4.5 years later, that investigation is actually now complete, and it is publicly available. So if you all wanted to go read it, just Google the Integrity Committee. I'm not going to try to give you a URL right now, but Google Integrity Committee, you can look it up. But it was 4.5 years later, and the stress of that period of time, and having been riffed and being told repeatedly it's going to be out any month now, any day now, don't worry, it'll be out. It was pretty miserable for me. And there's more to say. It's a long story, but rather than tell all of it, I would like to pass the microphone to my colleague, my former colleague who was with me in the OIG, and now my new colleague, because we've started a law firm together, Jessica Riley.
Thanks, Ted. So Ted told what it's like when you leave the Office of Inspector General after whistleblowing, but I'll tell you what it was like for those who stayed behind. After Ted made his protected disclosures, several of us were called to testify. And I mean, they sent the A-team. These were several-hour intensive interviews with, federal investigators. We're like, something's going to happen. And then nothing happened. The Inspector General, the wrongdoer, openly started making fun of whistleblowers in the office. Oh, people file complaints on me all the time. It doesn't matter. Integrity Committee is not going to do anything. Nothing happened for 4.5 years. And she's publicly saying this. And it became very clear to staff. We saw what happened to the last person that spoke up. Why risk it? One by one, everyone who participated in the investigation was ran out, and they all have terrible stories they could tell. I'll tell you mine. It was last summer. It was June 20th, 2024. I received my performance review. I'm an amazing employee. Outstanding. 380 out of 400, and I'm getting promoted. 4 days later, the Integrity Committee gives a report of the investigation to the Inspector General, along with a copy of my confidential sworn testimony. Part of the report of investigation found she retaliated against whistleblowers. Shocker, I experienced retaliation. Promotion pulled, professional reputation ruined. I was intentionally and maliciously, maligned to other staff. I was isolated. It got so bad I had to leave. The worst part about this is they didn't tell me that they gave my confidential testimony. When I talked to them, they said, we'll protect you. There's nothing to worry about. Whistleblowers have protection. They did not give me the courtesy to let me know. If they had told me, I would have protected myself. I would have documented. I would have gotten an attorney. I would have gone to the agency head. I would have known. Instead, they put me in a position where they prioritize the wrongdoer's due process. Everyone has a chance to defend themselves, even the accused, but so should the whistleblower. But Ted and I don't want to just complain about what goes wrong in the OIG. We want to see meaningful change. He and I each will talk about a couple priority examples. And the first is the structure of the Integrity Committee. It's made up of different inspectors general. They all go on an annual retreat together. They know each other. We take the same trainings. It's self-policing by your friends. We believe that the Integrity Committee should be either fully funded with protections in place to ensure that bias is minimized, maybe have it be the FBI or another agency who can come in and do unbiased investigations. And then secondly, we need to see meaningful reform about how the OIG handles whistleblower complaints. If they share your testimony with the accused, at a bare minimum, they need to notify you beforehand so you can make those important time-sensitive decisions to be able to document, protect yourself, get counsel. I'll hand it over to Ted to talk about a few more structural issues.
We're finishing up here, but I do have two very sort of low-hanging fruit recommendations. One is that of the very limited oversight that occurs for offices of inspectors general, there are peer reviews, and these are every 3 years. For investigative groups, there are peer reviews only if your Office of Inspector General has law enforcement authority. Now, certainly, you should have peer reviews if you have law enforcement authority, but as the head of investigations at my federal agency, I frequently worked interagency investigations with DHS or state or other federal agencies that did have law enforcement authority. So I was actively working with special agents who were doing standard knock and talk interviews, who were carrying firearms, who went through all of their training, and my agency did not have mandatory peer reviews. And so there was no oversight at all of the investigative function. And had there been, right, my boss might not have been able to pull off some of the ridiculous stuff that they, more than one actually, tried to do. So mandating investigative peer reviews, it's low-hanging fruit. This is not a major reform of the IG Act, just mandate investigative peer reviews for all offices of inspectors general. Very easy. And then the second, also very easy, as I mentioned, I was in the then newest Office of Inspector General in the federal government. And there's this perception that you should not be peer reviewed at all. There should be no outside oversight because you're new and maybe you don't have a body of work yet to actually peer review. And to me, that is completely backwards. The notion that you haven't done an investigation yet, and so you should have no like outside counsel or outside help on structuring your policies or creating your culture as to how to do an investigation properly is ridiculous. And so another amendment to the Inspector General Act I would recommend is to mandate annual peer reviews for any new Office of Inspector General that's stood up. And this happens every 5 years or so. So this is not like a dead issue. There will be another one in a couple of years, I'm sure. And like, let's get that office off to the right start.
Sure. So, hi, my name is Kim Williams. I'm a spokesperson for In Workplace Abuse. We've been very good friends and partners with Whistleblowers of America. I'm also soon to be a founder of the Fair Path Project. And so I'm kind of adjacent to a lot of you guys. My background is in HR. I started out in the federal government. I was a diplomat with the State Department when I was assigned to HR. I was initially mortified. I couldn't believe that happened to me. But then I ultimately fell in love with it because you did so much meaningful work. I was with people on the best day of their lives and on the worst day of their lives. I left after 8 years and tried to transition to more private sector work. And it was a very difficult transition. Nobody was interested in my resumes. Finally, a kind recruiter reached out to me and said, no one wants to read your War and Peace novel. How about a one-page model? And kind of helped me adjust and translate into another type of life. And so leaving the State Department, ironically, in this context, I actually had great protection. I worked with really brave individuals. They didn't care if you were a political appointee. They didn't care if you were an ambassador. They would scream at them. They would haul them in. They would say, we're being sued for $2 million because of the dumb things you said. And I actually grew up thinking that was normal in HR land. And so when I left the State Department, I got my own rude awakening where I dealt with corruption, I dealt with racism, I dealt with sexism, I dealt with having to open investigations into my bosses and board members and them not liking that and dealing with all the things that came back with it. And ultimately, I ended up being bullied pretty badly in a very scary and intimidating kind of way. And ended up getting an attorney who helped me kind of figure out how to move outside the rules. I mean, we all know that there's protections for discrimination, but there's really no protection if you're just bullied in most contexts. And so we were able to figure out how to negotiate an exit, to have a successful settlement. And then I started telling my story, and more people started coming to me. Reporters were reaching out. The first story that came out about me was called "How to Sue Your Boss," and I remember my mom wrote me that day, and she was like, "Are you fired?" And I'm like, "No, actually, I'm not." And so I just kept talking about it. And over the years, more people have come to me and talked about their hardships and their fears over addressing bullying. And I tend to work really hard on connecting folks with attorneys who know how to work outside the line. And that's part of the reason why I love this so much. I have learned so much about so many things that touch other worlds that you guys might not even think about. I mean, what I learned from Jackie, and how the VA was able to assess how they evaluate trauma, and that there's a dollar amount that they can put on that, and that can show up in an employment cases. And then learning how what happens with Title VII directly impacts Title IX. And my daughter was bullied, and some of the things I learned from this actual conference helped her win a massive settlement because of these things. And so you guys are actually touching the whole world, I think, in ways you may not be thinking about. And so for me, living in HR over the years, talking about how to sue your boss, talking about these things, figuring out law firms that do specialize in Like, okay, there may not be a law for being bullied in New York, but there is a workers' comp claim. And in Texas, if the handbook says we'll investigate harassment and we don't, well, that's a contract violation. And figuring out all these ways to begin piecing together resources for folks. And so that is what I'm trying to stand up now with the Fair Path Project. And one of the things that I really wanted to share with this group in particular is that I wanted to create a home for people. I've heard it come up a number of times today, and I've heard it over the years, is that people are terrified of being in this job market in particular when they don't have a job, or they're terrified of trying to transition, just as I did, from public sector to private sector. So part of what the Fair Path's mission is to give people status. And so if you were a VP of marketing, I will make you a volunteer VP of marketing so that you can have something on your LinkedIn profile. You can have something on your resume. You actually do have to volunteer because my attorney says it would be fraud if we don't do that. But that we'll come up with ways where at the very least, if you're going through some other nightmare process, that at least you don't have this stigma hanging over you that you never deserved in the first place. And so, that will be one of the key parts. And then, of course, making up a huge set of resources. I know you guys had also talked about, and I hope you mentioned today too, about, a hotline that everyone shares, and that by kind of pooling that resource, it becomes affordable for companies. There's so many great innovative things that are out there, great attorneys that can help people specifically with bullying. Some of the resources from whistleblowers, if I'm not able to help them, then I can do that. So these are things that are there. And then also too, just as one more food for thought, is engaging with HR folks. They suffer so much more than people realize. And a lot of back channel conversations, they talk about how, they actually do try and stand up for people, and a lot of the punching down happens to them. And so I'll be looking at special resources there. So if you have anyone that needs help, I may be able to help them. I can't pay them at this stage. I promise to keep buying lottery tickets. And if that works out, then I can eventually hire folks, because I would love to help everyone in the world that does this. And then I'm also here with my amazing friend, Lauren. Her and I work together on in-workplace abuse. And so we are working on passing legislation that would basically make bullying unlawful, so that someone can have a private right of action against an employer. And this is private sector. I know we get that. We get questions, understandably, from folks in the federal world. But again, going back to that bigger ecosystem and that one big family, we're hoping that a win for us here could become a win for others. So I am working to push this conversation forward at the federal level. So we've been speaking with Senator Cassidy from Louisiana to try and pitch this as the health epidemic that no one talks about, because 50 million employees in the United States have suffered some form of trauma from workplace abuse across all different sectors. And so trying to at least get a congressional study. Nothing's been done at this level to put some research behind this, so that we hope in the future that we can build upon that. And then working in states like Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, we came very close to passing legislation that would have opened up that private right of action for employees who've been bullied in Rhode Island. We've made good headway in Hawaii. We've made good headway in Massachusetts, where 3 different variations of this bill are now under consideration. And then I'm working with the DC City Council, and if we could just get the federal government to calm down, I think we could move that forward. So we're engaging with them too. And I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and maybe talk about the bill. Yeah.
Absolutely. So as Kim said, Lauren Footman, I am based in Pennsylvania. I come to this work as someone who has survived workplace abuse and trauma and discrimination. I was a county diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. I was the inaugural person in this role for Delaware County in Pennsylvania. And so as Kim alluded to, when you're in certain roles, whether it's DEI, HR, et cetera, when you do try to stand up, you then become the target because people want to continue their bad behavior, and it's so normalized in the workplace. And so when I first reached out to then Speaker Joanna McClinton, who happens to be my state rep in Pennsylvania, I was just reaching out because I said something's missing from our workplace. We're not having the right conversations, but also, as Kim said, that there's a lot of laws that don't support it if you can't prove discrimination, if you can't do certain things. And so where does that leave individuals. And so I reached out to her in the fall of 2023, just reaching out to say, like, have you all thought about this? Fast forward, by the time we had the meeting in 2024, I became a victim of workplace abuse and discrimination and all of the things that come along with that. And it talks about that cycle when you do have people that are willing to speak up about government, or within other organizations, because I worked in corporate before I came there. It has been a very interesting parallel to see working across sectors, where I think sometimes people think that, oh, government is a safety, would have better things in place. But as we heard from you two, sometimes they can be the worst actors. And even though this current bill does not actually cover the public sector, I have a lot of conversations with the elected officials around the fact that you all need to model good behavior. You cultivate laws and enforce them upon other sectors and individuals, but then you all are some of the worst arbitrators of it. And when your colleagues do these things and it's public, you still endorse them every election. And so we see that running rampantly across the field as well, and recognizing the unique position of, at least in other spaces, whether it's nonprofit, whether it's corporate, there's sometimes training. There's a lot of people that don't have any prior experience with managing people, understanding employment laws and basic things when they become elected, but then they take on a lot of responsibilities of managing people, cultivating their careers, or harming them in the process. And so thinking a lot about that. And so we have developed a coalition in the state of Pennsylvania where we have a version of a bill, the Healthy Workplace Bill, and we're trying to make friendly amendments to it to bring in some of the great aspects of the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, which in workplace abuse has worked to cultivate and revise just based on consistent conversation and recognizing what is actually passable, feasible, and bringing along businesses. And I'll turn it back to Kim to talk about the importance of bringing businesses along in this conversation, because they can be a advocate or they can be a detractor, because again, it's yet another thing where they're like, you're creating liability for me. I will say one of our biggest opportunities that we do have in Pennsylvania in particular, we do have buy-in from the House, which is controlled by Speaker Joanna McClinton, who has come out as a great representative. And so although we understand that the advocacy is going to take time, just like most issues, but how can we use this opportunity for ongoing engagement and education? When we hosted a hearing last summer, one of the things that we found out is most of the elected officials that came to the policy hearing, they had directly experienced workplace abuse, or they had saw their parent experience it, and then they recognized, hey, there aren't rules that we have in place. We're not tracking this. And we do talk about physical safety, but what about psychological safety? And how do we raise the level of consistency across physical and emotional safety at work? And one of the biggest opportunities that align with what you said is who would enforce it? And so I just connected one of our co-founders, Deb, with someone who used to work at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. She was essentially asked to leave because she was being mistreated by the executive director. And then being told, we don't want to talk about this publicly because we are getting a lot of complaints and we don't want to. Well, that would be the agency, if we get this bill passed, that would have oversight. And so when you talk about just making sure that we're having the proactive conversations and making sure that the due diligence and checks and balances exist within these organizations that exist in government to protect us, if they are being bad actors with their own employees, how do we as advocates, survivors, and constituents have faith that they'll be doing the right thing when our case comes before them?
That's great. And as Lauren just pointed out, a number of you in here, including GAP, Tom Devine, and Whistleblowers of America, have co-signed on with the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. And so we would love to include anyone who may be interested. Over 200 organizations have now co-signed on this piece of legislation. And when we're having these conversations with lawmakers across the U.S., as you can imagine, that's a pretty powerful talking point. So would love to speak to anyone that might be interested in supporting us too. So thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. I feel really privileged to be up here with all of you. And I just want to, well, I'll introduce myself. My name is Shanna Devine. I'm the director of the Office of the Whistleblower Ombuds. And I wanted to just start by thanking Jackie and your whole team for having organized this event. It is a thankless job to organize a conference. Anybody who's organized a conference knows that. And to thank the whistleblowers in the room, because it takes immense courage, as we all know, to speak up. And that discussion about courage and trust, and if they were to, how they work inversely, if we had more confidence in the process, it wouldn't have to take as much courage. Andy, thank you for raising that. It's a point really well taken, and that goes back to, frankly, the point of our Office of the Whistleblower Ombuds, in trying to increase the confidence that the public and potential whistleblowers will have in speaking truth to power when contacting their elected officials in the relevant committees. So I'll give some more background and context on that. But I just wanted to start by thanking everyone. Quick question, show of hands. Who lobbied yesterday? Okay, great. There were a fair number of you. How did it go? Any reactions?
From the interns or
anyone? Is it okay to just open this for a moment?
The interns loved the flowers and the handouts.
Other reactions, you can just, yell them out. Reactions by Congress, by the members you met with, by the staff?
I think most people got to see some staff, and
okay.
Jamie was a star at this yesterday, going in and got you. Yes, they. I think they were the last two on the hill.
Yeah, I mean,
everybody else tuckered out.
I was talking to Scott a little bit today about.
I had someone ask, actually, when we were leaving the Hart building, they asked like what our organization was, and they had asked partisan or nonpartisan. I was like, nonprofit. And he was laughing at me. I'm like, he probably thinks I'm not very educated on the topic, but I could tell that he was just not very, like, if I was going to answer one way, he wasn't going to be receptive to that. I felt like I got that energy going into the offices, and I was a little hesitant. I'm like, I've heard this name before. I don't think if we go in there, it's going to be productive. But surprisingly, Mississippi, Oklahoma, there were quite a few that we had great. They handed us business or the legal cards to connect with them and set up meetings. Oklahoma was very excited to set up a meeting. So I was kind of surprised by that. But so, yeah, they gave me chocolate. They're like, we'll get you a meeting. And I was like, perfect. So go eat some Oklahoma chocolate. It's really good.
Thank you for sharing that reaction and that experience. And that's actually really helpful for setting the stage for this discussion. You don't know who you're going to get on the other side of that conversation. So, we encourage Congress, when you're hearing from potential whistleblowers, go at it with an open mind. Listen to them, give you all the benefit of the doubt. And likewise, if you're unsure about a potential office and whether or not to talk to them, of course, we recommend do your homework. I'll go into that further. But also, in our experience, the folks who use our services on Capitol Hill, they're reaching out. It's in a voluntary capacity. They don't have to use our services. It's because they want to do their best to, one, make sure that their boss is conducting the oversight that they have the responsibility to conduct. Also that they're effectively serving their constituents. You're their constituents. They have the responsibility to work effectively with you. But these folks really care and are committed in our experience, the ones who decide to reach out. So let me just give a little more background and context for our office. Now, we were established as an independent, nonpartisan, that term comes up, but it's important for our integrity as an office, support office within the House of Representatives. So we're only House facing. And our function, kind of our reason for being set up, was to try to institutionalize the best practices that this community has put in place for working with whistleblowers. So how Congress can protect your confidentiality and partner with you to have an impact as safely as possible, doing the least amount of harm possible. Because you, at the end of the day, have to live with the consequences, you and your families, as we know. And that's what we remind Congress about. And that goes back to our goal, which is to help ensure that Congress is prepared for these interactions so that you can have more confidence when you're considering contacting them. But I do want to acknowledge, a few things. One, in terms of the appetite for this on Capitol Hill. I said using our services it's voluntary, but last Congress alone, 83% of all offices within the House, member offices and committees, utilized our services in some capacity. So they either took a training, and our trainings include things like we were able to partner with Jackie and others in the room on explaining what it looks like when a whistleblower experiences retaliation and educating Congress on what's at stake for you all when you come forward, the psychological impacts, the mental health impacts, as well as the economic and other impacts. So 75% of offices took our training last Congress. They also worked with us to develop intake development procedures so they are prepared and they have a proper tip line in place to hear from you. And then about 50% of offices also used our case consultation services. So we can coach them on the back end when they're hearing from a whistleblower. We can advise them on what are the best practices and next steps to take. So I'll preview that a little bit further. That said, offices may utilize our services, but I do want to caution they have an immense amount of discretion when it comes to how they handle your cases. So if there's nothing else, we could recommend, I could share with you from our perspective, this, preaching to the choir here, but make a plan before you consider contacting Congress and partnering with them. And first and foremost, consult your loved ones, right? Because you all as a family have to live with consequences, but also work with an experienced attorney. Because they're going to be your lifeline throughout this process and help prevent any potential missteps that you'll have to otherwise live with for the rest of your lives. So those are kind of two key pointers that we stress. Now let's shift gears a little bit to explain our resources, because I think those could be valuable moving forward. We as an office, we don't actually have the jurisdiction to receive disclosures from whistleblowers. Our name is misleading that way. Rather, we're a support office for Congress. But we have developed a menu of guiding resources that I think would benefit this community. A lot of them have been inspired by you all and recognize the organizations that are here today. So we shared with the conference organizers, Andrew, is it? Paul, we shared it with. Your name is? Joe, I know Paul's not here, but Joe, I don't know if you have access to it or anybody else does. It's whistleblower.house.gov, and then on it we have a link, whistleblower resources. So I'm going to be referring back to that a few times, and we'll make sure that folks who are here can access it somehow if that's of interest. But I want to bring your attention to that resource because on it we have a number of best practices to keep in mind if you're considering working with Congress. We also have a menu of what we call whistleblower survival tips. We've stolen that from the support organizations, from the Government Accountability Project, who largely kind of established these tips, which provide a framework for you to take precautions on your end as you're going through this process and working with Congress. So those are resources that we have on our website, and then a menu of referral options, non-governmental referral options, Whistleblowers of America, the organizations in this room, so that if you're trying to figure out where to start, where to find an experienced attorney and get that peer-to-peer support network, you can go to that menu of support organizations. So that's something publicly available. And then we have a number of other resources I'll go into, but I did just want to kind of acknowledge that up front. Now I'm just going to preview for just 5 minutes or so we can get to the questions. Preview some of our best practice tips and resources that we share, kind of how we coach Congress on working effectively with you all. And then the other side of that coin is how you can be proactive in your work with them. And this is largely grounded in establishing trust, right? So trust has been a common theme today. Andy brought it up in your presentation earlier. You all need to have trust and confidence in the process to stick your necks out, as the giraffe comparison would be made. So with that, let's just go through a few of those pointers. Now, when we're coaching Congress on working with whistleblowers, we explain that this is going to be unique from their standard casework or working with maybe a non-source witness for a few significant reasons. Of course, the risks involved for you all as whistleblowers, and therefore the confidentiality requirements that at least in the House are in place, which means they're prohibited from publicly identifying you without your advance written consent. So that is a right you have in the House as long as you're engaging in protected whistleblowing. If you're not sure if it's protected whistleblowing, that's why you want to speak with an attorney in advance. And then also for Congress, the reason they're going to partner with you and the reason you're coming forward is to have an impact. So we stress your role as oversight partners for these individuals. Now, for you all, I previewed this before, but do your homework when you're considering contacting Congress. Again, there is a lot of discretion that offices have in how they handle your cases. So see if they have a good track record. If they're a relevant committee of jurisdiction, we have a committee jurisdiction tool on our website you can utilize to identify that. Figure out if they're the right audience for your disclosures. Ask who the point person is who handles whistleblower matters if you're doing those door drops and you kind of want to make sure you're speaking with the right staffer. We can provide more coaching on that front, but that's where a whistleblower support organization can really help you to connect with the right folks as well. The next pointer we provide for Congress is, front load. If they're hearing from you, they should be front loading those guiding resources. Even before they know what level of involvement they're going to have with you, they can still be helping to identify kind of the menu of relevant governmental and non-governmental referral options for you to keep in mind to help achieve your goals. And that would include that menu of nonprofit whistleblower support organizations. We have a number of legal fact sheets that outline kind of the rights, essentially know your rights documents for your protections and kind of your options when working with Congress. Congress can provide that information to you. There are a number of ways that they can help you to kind of create essentially a roadmap as you're figuring out those next steps. But a lot of that starts with helping connect you with experienced counsel. So we always go back to that. And then for you all, the next pointer we recommend is ground rules. So as Congress is working for you, we recommend they understand, are there any limitations around how they can use the information you're providing them? They have discretion, remember, so keep that in mind. You want to make sure you trust and have confidence in the recipient of your information before you give it to them, with the exception of not publicly identifying you, and somebody could violate that. They do have a lot of discretion how they use this information. So let them know what your request for confidentiality is, but know there may be inherent limitations to that. So that goes into our next point, which is if you do want to partner and work together moving forward, make a plan for how to safely do that. Now, a lot of those tips have been covered today. Like a few panels ago, they discussed how to safely secure evidence as an employee and legally secure evidence and then provide it to Congress in a lawful way. Likewise, for Congress, they want to make sure that they're communicating with you in a way that can help best protect your communications. So a few pointers we have along those lines are we recently worked with the House Information Resources Center to approve the use of end-to-end encryption for whistleblower communications. Signal is now an application that any House staffer can utilize in their communications with you all. Now for you, the tips include things like if you're making a plan for how to communicate with Congress, in most situations, you want to do it from your non-work resources, right, to better protect your communications. So put that Signal app on your non-work phone. But these are just a few quick pointers that you can look to in those whistleblower survival tips to better protect your work with Congress. There's now an end-to-end encrypted web form that congressional offices can use in the House that we work to develop for you to contact them, committees and member offices. So these are just a few examples of making a plan as you're partnering to safely team up and have an impact. Now, we also stress with Congress that they should be relying on your expertise for any follow-up in that oversight process, because you are the subject matter experts at the end of the day. We had the privilege of seeing Everett receive an award earlier, and this was pioneer whistleblower who had helped pave the way for the anti-money laundering statute that has a very significant whistleblower bill in it. So this is just one example of how Congress, when working with you, can turn your warnings into essentially corrective action to correct the systemic abuses that shouldn't be occurring. So we stress with them, partner with you to fix these abuses by turning your expertise into power. And with that, that's probably a good segue to my final point here, which is keep an open line of communication for new developments on both ends. So if you experience retaliation after working with a congressional office, they need to know. They have a responsibility to support you in the process. And we stress that for them in our training. Solidarity is going to be key to survival. That's why conferences like this are so significant, to network and rely on one another to kind of challenge these abuses. You can't go at it alone. But Congress should be a key player in supporting you, especially because we're benefiting from your knowledge at the end of the day. So we coach them on ways in which they can do that. And then likewise, if there are new developments around your whistleblowing, if the corrective action isn't taking root, if there's new evidence, you want to keep that line of communication to help ensure that Congress is engaging in the relevant oversight. So those are just a few pointers. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion, and glad to go through any questions as well. And thank you to the panelists and your courage for coming forward. I just hate hearing about what happened with the Integrity Committee, and that's case in point, an example of where we caution, even when you have these referral options at the end of the day, confidentiality, can't be guaranteed, and folks need to do their homework. So thank you for those policy reform recommendations as well.
So I think those are great examples of the different types of ways of engaging with elected officials, whether it's at the state or federal level, and the types of committees and resources and things. And this is, every year we try to focus on something else and give different examples. So appreciate the panel today covering sort of a broad set of topics. Are there any questions for this group? Of course.
I wanted to know if the Integrity Committee ruled for you folks after 4.5 years.
So the answer to that can't be one word, but I'm happy to tell you. The 4.5-year investigation ruled for me. It found that the Inspector General and his deputy had committed a series of bad acts. The Integrity Committee, and I can say all this because it's public now. The Integrity Committee, without explanation, disregarded substantial portions of their own investigators' findings. That is extraordinarily unusual. It actually violates sort of fundamental investigative rules. For instance, credibility assessments are performed by the special agents. I'm in addition to being an attorney, I'm trained as a special agent. Credibility assessments are core to any investigation. The person who's actually interviewing a target or a witness, you can't, review a transcript that's 9 hours long and get the same sense of the person, right? And the Integrity Committee disregarded the credibility assessments of this team of special agents and attorneys who performed these interviews. So the Integrity Committee put a 3-page cover on this 80-page report of investigation in which they affirmed some of the findings and disregarded some of the others. So that's the slightly shorter answer to your question, but I was very unhappy with the fact that they disregarded some of their own investigators' findings and did so with almost no explanation.
But if they ruled for you at all, that's like winning the lottery, sir.
I appreciated winning the lottery. The underlying report of investigation was very thorough, and disregarding some of the findings of fact and the credibility assessments, as a trained investigator myself, I found that to be highly unusual.
Any other questions? So you come here. Yeah. So I'm going to put him on the spot for a minute because he came in from New York and JFK.
A lot of first names.
So I'm going to give this to you and just explain what the ISO is.
Sure.
So he asked a question question earlier, and I wanted to explain.
Yeah, for anyone who was here for I asked the lawyer panel about if federal agencies are insured and if they're seeing an uptick in, of this. Oh, come over here. Oh, right. Oh, you all are recording. I'm scared. Anyway, hi, everybody, I'm James and Felton and Keith. I have a lot of first names. Most people can't remember which one is first, so people call me JFK in New York. I'm a political candidate, but this is not a political conversation. We're not here to talk about politics per se. In my day work, I run an insurance company called Inclusion Score, and I'm the chair of the International Standard for DEI. So there's an ISO standard, if anyone's familiar with ISO. Essentially, everything that we do well as a species since World War II, there's a standard for at the International Organization for Standards. It should be iOS, not ISO. I'm not sure if Steve Jobs sued about that. Anyway, in a nutshell, the DEI standard, it looks a lot like a cybersecurity standard. They're ISO standards for the textiles in your shirts, for the fuel in your vehicle, you name it. It's basically about consensus, right? So over the course of the past 12, 15 years, from 2011 to 2021, it took us about 10 years to get a consensus on what DEI is. And it's essentially whistleblowing. And we put it in two silos, retaliation, discrimination, which is similar to how the EEOC marks whistleblowing. And the standard is really a standard that looks at organizational structure across corporate governance, things you do with your executives, corporate HR. I think that's what most people are familiar with, things you do with your employees, corporate product delivery, whether your product is a service or something more tangible. And last but not least, corporate supplier diversity. And it just calculates other organizational stakeholders, companies that feed into your org. Basically, everyone works for the S&P 500, whether they identify as one of those companies or not. And what the standard does is gives us a path, or executives a path, to identify who is in their organizations. So it's not a moral standard. It's not telling you how to think about inclusivity. It's giving you it's a mechanical engineering tool to understand both who is in your organization and how you seek what we call feedback mechanisms from them, which is essentially a duping into whistleblowing. And so as an insurance guy, before I was a politician, right, we tie your maturity score and being able to tell the organization who's in your organization and those feedback mechanisms. We tie, you're who I was looking for earlier, right? I was looking for you earlier, yeah. This is what I meant by the, we'll talk. What we're doing, I'll finish this point so that it makes sense for everyone. What we do is tie those feedback mechanisms and your company's maturity to engage those feedback mechanisms to your insurance premiums, like employment practice liability for HR, directors and officers. Usually when you sue big companies and you sue this big guy, it's usually a guy in a suit that looks like this, right? That's called directors and officers insurance. Most companies have to have it. All companies pretty much have that, but it also engages things like professional liability, errors and omissions. Like if your company doesn't meet the Americans with Disability Act, which is an update to the Civil Rights Act from 1991, that was George Bush 1 who pushed that through, it's illegal. Not only rounding curves at buildings, but failing to list things like what your pictures say on your website, it is illegal, right? And so when I asked the lawyer panel earlier, are they seeing an uptick in grievances? It's because I care if those go to court because I can raise the price of doing business via insurance premiums. The cost of failing to acknowledge whistleblowers, the cost of bigotry, you name it, is actually your insurance premiums, plus all these ad hoc programs that we spend money on doing, plus at least one risk manager, which is probably an HR person who doesn't know how to do their job. And most of them don't know how to do their job. Sorry for anyone who works in HR.
That's a fair statement.
So there you go, right? Because there's no published way to do it. So we use the standard for that, and that's how Jackie and I met. I think you all are a ready-made bank of people, and I know it's difficult to do, to sue. But as the American in the room, I think, we should get more familiar with suing the pants off of people, and it will become too expensive to do business. Last thing I'll add, and I know we're here talking about a lot of federal agencies and the federal government, but every state and municipal government is just considered a corporation, and they have insurance, and they are vulnerable to this. I know many mayors who are being sued by mostly women in the workforce are really driving this right now, and whether they're in state self-insured states or whether they actually are insured by Chubb, Zurich, Lloyd's, AIG, they are feeling the burn of the price of doing business. We want to make the price of doing business too high. I do think that we can pass more regulation that holds the federal government to account in the way that state and municipal governments are held to account. And so every time you drive into a new city and you see incorporated in or established in whatever, 1881, 1935, et cetera, those groups are creating a new corpus, a new personhood, which is why they won Citizen United back in 2010. For some of you might know what that is. But every time they're doing that, that creates liability, potential liability, if you all are brave enough to stand up and talk about how you've been aggrieved. So bless you all. I think, I hope you find the courage to do it more and to be giraffes, as Jackie and Paul will put it. And we'll be here tomorrow. We will exist past 250 years. I'm confident of that. So we're gonna work on it. For the kids, I just met a bunch of kids in I was gonna say green room, but the other room, it wasn't very green. But yeah, thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Jackie's got my phone number, my social security number, and my mother's maiden name. So if anyone can get contact, just hit her up and I'm around.
Yeah, wait, I think there are no questions.
I got a train at Union Station, 30 minutes, yeah, but it's a 16-minute Uber, yeah. I think, or I can run. I think.
We can die.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Julie, what's your question? Oh, okay.
And what best practices can auditors adopt to address not just fraud, but also toxic workplace culture and abuse uncovered during investigations? So what best practices can auditors adopt to address not just fraud, but also toxic workplace culture and abuse uncovered during investigations?
Okay. I think we're on one microphone.
Even though I was a BEI officer and I was bringing forward their concerns. Thank you, Jackie. I was bringing forward concerns, and so there was a committee established. So I'm going somewhere with this. There was a committee established, and the person who was the new appointment to the committee was the person that was harassing everybody. And it's so sad that you just have to laugh to keep from crying. So what I think is, and fast forward, they're also now creating their own human relations commission for people to come and give grievances. And so I think a lot of times our initial reaction is we put in oversight. And I think, as we heard from our colleagues here, it's not just enough to pass bills. It's not just enough to establish a committee. One of the things that we're pushing for in Pennsylvania is a lot more transparency as it relates to public reporting to the State Human Relations Commission. So for their annual reports, they'll say, oh, we solved 12 cases a year. I'll just do that out. But if you got 20,000 cases, that's not even a qualified, like that's not, we're not even like cutting the surface. And so what I would say is it's definitely ensuring that there's policies and procedures that start to include not just financial disparity, but also the discrimination and the psychological abuse pieces. So you do need the policies. You probably do need a committee, but the big piece of it is the transparency piece, because when it happens behind closed doors, you don't know that it's happening. There is no accountability. And I think that is a lot of times the missing link. And we've been really encouraging people to say, okay, we've passed the policies. Because again, as I shared earlier, this will be overseen by the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. if and when passed, but then there's concerns around, will they be good stewards of the policies? And is there, again, the recurring fee, is there any trust with the public? And so I would just say that would be the biggest thing, is prioritizing the psychological aspect along with the financial and physical safety pieces, putting in the appropriate oversight with maybe external partners, and then also allowing and requiring distilled information that can be publicly reported. So there is the public who can go and ask follow-up questions.
Did you say has any of the states passed any legislation yet?
No, we know Puerto Rico has something passed. I mean, we came very close in Rhode Island, and they're on a 1-year legislative calendar, so we'll be back there in January. And Massachusetts on a 2-year program. Did you testify recently? So they had a short notice session, but about 50 of us testified before the Joint Labor Committee. That was like 2 months ago, so we'll see where that goes.
Jackie, can I just add a PS on legislation? This is at the federal level, not the state. But one of the tools our office has developed at the recommendation of this community, Becca Jones, our deputy director, has really led on them, is a whistleblower legislation tracker. And I know there was a lot of whistleblower legislation that was discussed in the earlier panels. You can find all of that related legislation on our website, including the status of how far it is in the legislative process. And we also have a best practices whistleblower legislation standards tool. So we'll need to make sure that transparency is on there for whether or not the developments are taking root, because that's absolutely a significant one. But independence in terms of the credibility and that investigative process for looking into retaliation is a critical element. So thank you.
All right, thank you.